Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the wind never stops. The tea is salty and your bed is basically a flattened camel. Welcome to the Mongol steppe, minus the raids, the battles, and the inconvenient historical bloodshed. You're not a warrior tonight. You're just a regular someone, waking up inside a nomadic felt-covered yurt somewhere in 13th century Central Asia. Outside, the landscape is endless. The air is dry and a distant sheep is already judging you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when people are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're curled up in the far left corner of the yurt, the gyr as locals call it, your head against a rolled-up sheepskin, the floor beneath you padded by layers of felt leather and woven wool. You're not exactly toasty, but you're also not freezing, thanks to last night's fire and the body heat of your entire extended family bundled around you. The scent in the air is a heady mix of singed mutton fat, sheep wool, and faint smoke. Honestly, it's kind of cozy. As the sun begins to glow pale behind the thick white canvas walls, you hear the first movements, a kettle clinking, someone shifting in their sleep, a goat bleating in a tone that says, yes, I too am awake and discontent. You sit up slowly wrapped in your thick woolen blanket and blink through the smoke ribboning from the central hearth. The yurt's circular roof hole, the tonneau, lets in just enough light to see the silver frost crusting the boots by the door. Someone hands you a wooden bowl of tea sutetsai, a steaming salty brew made from watermilk, and a sprinkle of crushed tea leaves. It's warm, savory, and somehow more broth than beverage. You sip cautiously. It tastes like someone tried to make soup out of fog and hope. But it works. You feel the warmth slip down into your core. Daily life here isn't fast. It's rhythm over rush. You shuffle over to stir the embers in the hearth, piling on a puck of dried dung, your primary fuel source. Yes, dung. Don't make that face. It burns slow, it's everywhere, and honestly, it doesn't smell half as bad as you'd think. The smoke spirals upward out the smoke hole, curling past the sky like a sleepy dragon. Across the yurt, a child rolls over and sneezes in their sleep. Grandma is already awake, of course, quietly whispering to herself as she folds yesterday's robes and mutters about the wind changing direction again. You sit back on your heels, listening to the fabric sounds, the slosh of tea, the scuff of felt boots against the floor. It's a small orchestra of quiet survival. You notice the yurt itself in the growing light, wooden lattice walls tied with horsehair rope, canvas patched in places with old saddle leather, and the ceiling beams stretching toward the smoke hole like the ribs of a great, gentle beast. The entire thing was designed to be disassembled and packed within hours. Mobility was the point. Nothing here stays still forever. Fun fact, historians still argue whether Mongol yurts evolved from earlier Turkic structures or if they were independently developed. What we do know is that by the time of Genghis Khan, a well-constructed yurt was both a home and a symbol of your social status. You want to flex on the neighbors, add more layers of felt, paint your door red, hang up that really good saddle, go wild. Your fingers, though, are still half numb from the cold. You press them around the warm bowl and glance toward the pile of robes and belts laid out beside the hearth. Dressing here is a multi-step affair, underlayers, woolen trousers, thick socks, your long outer robe called a deal, and a sash that somehow doubles as a tool belt, scarf, and emergency baby sling. A quick aside, you know how some people collect sneakers? Well, in the Mongol, steppe boots were a thing. Leather boots with upturned toes, great for stirrups, weirdly fashionable and terrible for sprinting. You slip yours on and wiggle your toes, still slightly damp from yesterday's snow. Fantastic. Someone opens the door, flap boom, freezing air rushes in like an uninvited guest. You shiver hard. Outside, dawn's first light hits the grasslands in sheets of dull gold stretching unbroken for miles. There are no trees, not even a good shrub, just you, the wind, and the occasional cow giving you the side eye. Time to step out, stretch, and face the frozen chaos of a new day on the steppe. You brace yourself and duck outside. Instantly, the wind slaps you across the face like a disapproving aunt. You pull your robe tighter and scan the small camp, maybe 6 or 7 yurts scattered in a loose cluster. Their felt walls turned slightly to the southeast to brace against the winter wind. Smoke rises from a few chimneys. A toddler is chasing a chicken. The chicken is not amused. As you take in the morning, you can't help but notice something unexpected: peace. For all their reputation, most Mongols didn't spend every day pillaging cities and rewriting maps. The vast majority of life was spent doing something much harder, trying not to freeze, starve, or get lost in a landscape that didn't care about your ambitions. You head toward the tethered livestock, fat sheep and shaggy goats bleating at the wind, and realize you've already been here long enough to stop noticing the smell. Progress. Inside the yurt, breakfast prep continues. You're handed a slice of dried cheese so tough it could double as construction material, and a steamed dumpling that tastes suspiciously like last night's dinner in a different shape. Delicious, nourishing, possibly older than you. You sit beside the hearth, sip the last of your tea, and take in the small details. A dog curled on a mat, a string of beads hung from a ceiling pole, the rhythmic creak of the roof as the wind shifts. This world isn't loud, but it speaks. It murmurs in felt and fire and frost. And just like that, you're awake, dressed, tea in your belly, slightly less frozen, ready more or less for whatever quiet, uncomfortable, dung-fueled adventure comes next. You step outside again, bracing yourself against the morning wind. It's no warmer, but at least the sun has climbed a little higher, casting long shadows over the sea of grass. You tug your sash tighter, half tempted to crawl back into the yurt and fake sleep. But no one gets to lounge when the firewood is dung and the livestock have been bleating since sunrise like tiny, furry alarm clocks. Breakfast duties are calling. You head toward the central cooking area, a raised fire pit, ringed with flat stones and a half-melted iron pot perched on top. Someone already lit it using last night's embers and, yes, another puck of dried dung. It's a smell you're learning to love. Warm, earthy, vaguely offensive, but somehow comforting. Like a campfire got into a fight with a barn and no one really won. You squat beside the fire, hands out for warmth. Nearby, a young woman is busy slicing fat into a pan while shouting something about a missing ladle. She points at you. You're volunteered. Without a word, you're handed a hunk of something chewy, possibly dried goat, possibly something more mysterious, and told to stir it into the bubbling broth. Breakfast is served. It's a stew of water, old meat flour scraps, and possibly a prayer. You ladle some into your wooden bowl and crouch beside a few others. Nobody talks much, too cold, too early, but you nod at each other like fellow survivors of the wool and dung trenches. The stew is hot, salty, vaguely sour, and entirely functional. Food here isn't about pleasure, it's about fuel. And this bowl is 100% premium, unleaded. One of the elders chuckles as you wince through a particularly gristly bite. City teeth, someone mutters. You smile, they're not wrong. Around the fire, small chores unfold with the ease of routine. Someone's churning fermented mare's milk in a goatskin bag. Someone else is sharpening a knife on a whetstone the size of your fist. A child is rolling balls of sheep fat between their palms and throwing them at a dog who is frankly delighted. There's an odd harmony in it all. No one seems in a rush yet. Everything happens in its proper time. The kettle boils, the meat sizzles, a baby screams, a goat answers. You sip your tea and try to feel useful. Fun historical fact. Mongol cooking rarely involved actual stoves. Everything was boiled or steamed over open flames. A lot of meals use stone-heated techniques, especially on long journeys. There's a famous dish called budog, which involves stuffing a whole marmot or goat with hot stones and cooking it from the inside. But don't worry, that's a party food. Breakfast is much simpler and slightly less terrifying. You finish your bowl and offer to clean it. The method: rub it with dried grass. Maybe a splash of water if you're feeling fancy. No soap, no sink, just friction and faith. It works better than you'd think. As the sun climbs, so does the activity. Someone is brushing down a yak. Another is untangling a rope that may or may not have been used to tie a camel to a suspiciously empty post. A boy trots by with an armful of fire dung. You do a mental double take. Yes, that's now part of your normal. Fire dung is a word you use now. Welcome to the new you. Historians still argue whether Mongol nomads had strict morning rituals or simply adapted to whatever tasks came with the season. What we know for sure is that winter mornings like this, especially without the pressure of raiding or war, were mostly about maintenance. You weren't conquering anyone. You were trying not to freeze your toes off. That's a victory in itself. Someone passes you a bundle of dried curds. You're instructed to pound them into powder with a small rock. It's harder than it sounds. The cheese is ancient and nearly immortal. Probably made before your yurt was born. You hammer away, creating a fine white dust that'll be added to tea or sprinkled on stew or used to exfoliate your soul. Meanwhile, breakfast cleanup begins. Everything is either shaken out, scraped down, or fed to the dog. There's a casual efficiency to it, honed by generations of repetition. No plates, no waste, nothing with an expiration date younger than a decade. And here's a quirky tidbit for your growing collection of things to whisper at parties. Some Mongol families believe that spilling milk was an offense to the spirit world. Milk was sacred, symbolic of the sky and purity, and sometimes even offered to the gods by flicking a few drops into the air. So you handle your bowl carefully. No pressure, but a divine entity might be watching your grip. You rise, knees creaking, and brush stray wool off your deal. Breakfast is over, but the day's just getting started. Someone hands you a bundle of reins and points toward the horizon. Time to check on the herds. You glance toward the animals in the distance, tiny dots moving like woolly ants across the vast plain. Before you leave, one of the older women slips a chunk of something into your sash. Emergency cheese for the journey. You nod solemnly. You're one of them now. You step into the wind again, your breath fogging in front of you. The sky is blue, the grass endless, and the day ahead promises nothing but labor, windburn, and the occasional moment of still, quiet wonder. You wouldn't trade it for anything. Well, except maybe a pair of waterproof socks. You head back inside the yurt, fingers tingling from the wind, only to be immediately roped into what could generously be described as a makeover, if your idea of a makeover includes goat hair thread and 6 layers of clothing. Someone has laid out today's wardrobe on a chest near the hearth, and judging by the amount of fabric, you're either being dressed or lightly mummified. Getting ready in the Mongol steppe is a whole production. First comes the inner layer, a thick, scratchy wool shirt that somehow feels both too loose and too tight. Over that, your deal a long robe, warm and wind-resistant, fastened with a sash at the waist. There's no zipper, obviously, and the button technology is, let's say, theoretical. You loop a braided cord around a wooden toggle. Fumble, try again, fumble again. Someone sighs and does it for you. Hush, it's fine, you'll get it eventually. Your sash is pulled tight enough to keep out the wind, but loose enough for breathing, which is polite. It also doubles as your personal storage unit knife. Tinder, pouch, extra cheese, lucky bone charm. You're basically a walking drawer. Then come the boots. Oh, the boots. leather worn, curled up toes to help with stirrup stability, and stuffed with enough wool to muffle your footsteps and all your regrets. They're surprisingly comfortable, assuming you don't mind mild foot sweat and the eternal scent of aged yak. You glance in a polished brass mirror shard hung from the yurt's central pole. You look Mongolish, windswept, sturdy, slightly alarmed, perfect. Someone gestures for you to sit. It's hair time. Mongol hairstyles weren't just for fashion, they had meaning. Gender, age, marital status, even regional identity could all be read from a person's braids. Today, one of the older girls is braiding your hair into a style that says, "I herd livestock," and occasionally meditate on clouds. She hums as she works fingers, tugging expertly through your hair. Tiny leather bands hold the ends in place. The scent of lanolin and smoke clings to everything, including you. It's not perfume, but it is strangely grounding. Meanwhile, another woman is adding some final flourishes to her own look. A string of beads, a bit of turquoise, and an eagle feather tucked into her sash. It's subtle glam. Mongol chic. If you really wanted to stand out, you could go full noble mode with a tall headdress or a silk deal, but those are for weddings envoys or people with fancier goats. Here's a fun fringe tidbit. Some Mongol warriors wore silk shirts under their armor, not for style, but because silk threads wouldn't tear easily when pierced by arrows. Instead, the fabric would wrap around the arrowhead and make it easier to pull out. Genius and horrifying. But hey, today's silk is just for staying warm and looking modestly impressive around the fire. You shift your weight, trying not to dislodge the braid now hanging over your shoulder. Across the yurt, a boy is struggling to tie his sash while also chewing dried cheese. Multitasking Mongol edition. You nod to him. He nods back solemnly. The braid has officially made you peers. As you stand up, someone checks your belt pouch and slips in an extra flint shard, just in case, they say. You're not entirely sure in case of what, but if it involves fire, you're glad to be ready. Historians still argue whether Mongol clothing was standardized by class or just adapted by need. What's clear is that form followed function. A deal kept you warm, dry, and wrapped up during windstorms that could erase a campsite in minutes. Belts weren't fashion, they were survival. And while nobility might dabble in colorful silks and fur linings, your average steppe dweller had one priority: don't freeze. You step outside into the midday chill, all dressed and maybe not ready, but insulated at least. The wind immediately tests your outfit by blowing directly up one sleeve. You wince. The deal passes. Barely. In the distance, someone is adjusting their robe with what can only be described as aggressive confidence. You take note. Maybe that's the secret: wearing everything like you meant to. There's no mirror on the steppe, no fashion blog, no influencer explaining the top 10 Mongol must-haves for winter 1225. Just wool leather and the occasional embroidered cuff, and yet you feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. You're dressed to survive, dressed to move, dressed to join a culture that conquers continents and then sits down for yak milk tea. You pause to admire the braid, the sash, the robe swishing at your ankles. Then a goat walks up and tries to eat your sleeve. Reality returns. You shoo. The goat gently tug your robe tighter and look toward the horizon. Time to face the day, braided, bundled, and slightly more fabulous than you were an hour ago. The air outside is sharp but clear, and the steppe stretches before you in every direction, an endless quilt of gold and brown, stitched by trails, only hooves remember. You squint into the distance where the herds are grazing. A loose cluster of goats wiggles across a low ridge, their tails twitching like pom-poms in protest of the wind. Someone tosses you a curved staff, your new best friend for the next few hours, and jerks their chin toward the flocks. Message received. You're on herd duty. Walking the steppe is both stunning and exhausting. Your boots crunch against frozen grass, The wind presses into your side, and every now and then you trip over a divot the size of a dinner plate. But the quiet is extraordinary. Just wind hooves, distant bleats, and the faint jingle of metal from bridles and ornamental harnesses. You breathe deeply. It smells like earth, wool, and freedom, with a hint of manure. You pass a cluster of sheep huddled around a sleeping dog. Not just any dog, a Bankar, a Mongolian livestock guardian curled in a furry donut of existential peace. These dogs are serious business. They're bred to guard bark only when it matters, and allegedly fight off wolves the size of mopeds. You resist the urge to pet it. This dog has a job, unlike you, who's basically just trying not to be trampled by your own shadow. You find a small rise and perch on top, scanning the land. Some goats are getting feisty near a shallow ditch. A few sheep have wandered off, clearly considering a career in solo travel. You clamber down, waving your staff, murmuring vague encouragements like, "Let's not do that," and "Please come back here before I cry." Herding, you quickly learn, is 10% action and 90% negotiation. You're not so much commanding animals as submitting well-reasoned arguments they mostly ignore. Fun historical fact. The Mongols relied on 5 core animals: horses, sheep, goats, camels, and cattle, each with their own roles. Sheep and goats provided meat, milk, and wool. Horses were transport and symbols of power. Camels were the desert SUVs, and cattle, well, they mostly plodded around looking moody. A single family could manage hundreds of animals, rotating them through pastures with remarkable efficiency. You guide a wandering goat back toward the main group, feeling briefly accomplished. Then another one darts off. It's like herding popcorn. Nearby, a teenager rides up on a pony barely taller than your chest. Mongol horses aren't large, but they're hardy, fast, and built like over-caffeinated tanks. The rider makes a clicking sound, and the horse responds immediately. You, on the other hand, try clicking, clucking, humming, even bribing, nothing. Your goats remain unimpressed. The teen grins and gallops off, hair flying like a movie extra in a historical epic. You sigh and poke the ground with your staff. Still no musical montage for you. Still, after a while, you fall into a rhythm. The sun drifts westward. The animals munch quietly. You learn to spot danger, the sudden hush that means a predator might be near, the strange formation that says one goat is planning something dramatic. You hum a little tune to keep yourself company. A sheep joins in. Kind of. It's probably coincidence. Here's a quirky tidbit. You didn't expect Mongols sometimes trained falcons and eagles to hunt, but they also believed in the spiritual balance between humans and animals. If a goat died mysteriously, some families might blame it on a spirit offense, not just illness. Livestock weren't just property, they were part of the steppe's sacred ecology. You look over at your little flock. Their horns curve like question marks. Their eyes stare with unsettling intensity. One goat is chewing on a stick that might be your staff if you don't intervene soon. You retrieve it with minimum dignity and maximum goat slobber. Historians still argue whether steppe herding was as easy as some early travelers described. Sure, the animals roamed freely, but that meant constant vigilance, constant motion, and constant mental math. Where are the calves? How's the grazing quality? Are we too close to another clan's pasture? Did a wolf sneak in last night? The answer is usually maybe followed by a shrug and a retied sash. By late afternoon, you're starting to feel it. Your knees ache, your fingers are numb, your respect for the average 12-year-old Mongol herder has skyrocketed. But also there's this moment, just one. The wind dies for a second, the sky turns golden, the animals huddle close without complaint. You stand in the center of it all, still, quiet, present. The steppe opens around you like a held breath, and somehow in that silence you feel exactly where you're supposed to be. Then a goat sneezes in your direction and ruins everything, but it was nice while it lasted. You begin guiding the animals home, waving your staff in slow arcs. The sun dips low, bleeding orange across the clouds. The silhouettes of yurts reappear, smoke curling from their tops like sleepy sighs. As you walk, one last thought settles in: herding isn't just moving animals. It's learning their patterns, their moods, their secrets. You're not the master here, you're part of the flow. Tomorrow you'll do it again, assuming your thighs recover. Back at the yurt, the door flap slaps gently in the wind, and you duck inside just as the chill starts to gnaw through your robe. The warmth hits instantly, dense, smoky, and tinged with the comforting scent of boiled milk and wool. It's dinner prep time, and the interior has shifted from quiet morning hush to low, bustling purpose. Someone hands you a wooden bowl and points toward a steaming pot suspended over the fire. You shuffle closer, cautiously peering inside. The stew is thick, bubbling, and unapologetically beige. Floating in it are chunks of meat, probably mutton, though. In this light, it could also be something more mysterious, like ambition. There are also wild onions, garlic, and something vaguely root-like that might be a carrot or a surprise. Food inside a Mongol yurt is simple, hearty, and built for endurance. You ladle some into your bowl and shuffle over to a small rug near the wall, careful not to trip over a sleeping dog or the family's sacred fire tools. You take your first bite and immediately learn that the Mongol palate is not big on seasoning. It's warm, filling, and slightly gamey, with a texture somewhere between chewy and, well, that's a tooth test. But you're hungry, really hungry. And soon the bowl is empty and your body is radiating comfort like a tired radiator. Meals are communal, eaten sitting cross-legged and filled with soft chatter jokes and the occasional, "Hey, who stole my last dumpling?" glare. Someone's already heating tsai salty milk tea over a pan, and it's as much ritual as it is beverage. You sip it slowly, the salt and fat weird at first, but oddly soothing after a few sips. It's like your tongue is being hugged by a dairy-based blanket. A younger cousin passes around dried curds known as arul. These things are tough, like maybe keep one in your boot as a self-defense weapon tough. You gnaw, politely wondering how Mongol children don't just permanently lose their molars, but they love it chewing away like it's candy, which in a way it is. High in protein, low in frills, and practically immortal. That chunk could survive a meteor impact and still taste like goat. Now here's your historical fact drop of the evening: the Mongol diet, while repetitive, was cleverly adapted to nomadic life. With no ovens, refrigeration, or spice racks, they relied on fermentation, drying, and boiling to keep food safe and edible across harsh climates. Fermented mare's milk arag was the MVP, offering hydration, nutrition, and the occasional giggle if it fermented too much. Yes, you could technically get tipsy on it, though you'd need a stomach of steel and a serious tolerance for funky. And the quirky tidbit: some Mongols believed eating the heart of a freshly slaughtered animal would grant strength. Not a daily ritual, but a symbolic one, done for warriors' weddings or high-stakes moments. You thankfully are not offered anything beating tonight, just dumplings. Booze, to be precise, small steamed dumplings filled with minced meat and fat. Someone pulls them from a covered dish and passes them around like rare treasure. You bite into one and immediately understand why everyone's smiling. It's delicious, juicy, slightly peppery, a culinary love letter from a sheep to your taste buds. As the meal winds down, bowls are collected, tea is topped off, and a sense of calm settles over the yurt, like a heavy wool blanket. Someone throws more dung on the fire. It burns hot, clean, and smells faintly earthy. You'd expected something worse, much worse, but this fire, like everything else in here, is efficient, practical, and steeped in centuries of know-how. Historians still argue whether the Mongols' minimal cuisine was a limitation or a deliberate efficiency. Some say it lacked variety. Others point out that it was ideally suited to survival, with no time wasted on frills. When you're riding 60 miles a day and sleeping wherever the ground allows you, don't need a garnish, you need calories. You lean back, belly full, eyes heavy. Outside, the wind rustles the felt walls. Inside, someone's softly plucking a two-stringed moringhistory, a horsehead fiddle with slow, sorrowful notes that feel like twilight distilled into sound. The melody weaves through the space like smoke wrapping around you, and the fire and the quiet conversation in a language older than borders. A child is already asleep, head resting on a sheepskin pillow. Another nods off mid-sip, the cup of tea still balanced in their lap. You smile. This feels less like a meal and more like a ceremony, the kind of daily, sacred normal that makes you wonder why we ever made things complicated. You stretch, carefully avoiding the sacred hearth, and help gather up bowls and leftover curds. The woman beside you gives an approving grunt, which, in Mongol speak, is basically a standing ovation. It's night now, full and deep. The yurt glows faintly from within. Outside, the steppe is a sea of dark, and the stars are already beginning to crowd the sky like curious onlookers. You feel fed, not just in your stomach, but in your bones, in your breath, in some old, quiet part of you that recognizes firelight and community as the original home. You settle near the wall, your back to the warm felt. The moringhistory keeps playing, the wind howls, and you sigh, content and slightly sleepy, already dreaming of the next bowl of dumplings. Sleep comes easily on the steppe, but the floor is firm and the cold has fingers. You stir once or twice in the night, shifting under your thick quilted blanket made of felt and padded sheep wool. Somewhere a horse neighs softly. A dog barks once, then thinks better of it. And then morning. You wake to the thump of someone stoking the fire and the smell of milk heating over embers. There's no alarm clock, just light filtering through the roof hole and the murmurs of people already 2 steps ahead of you. You blink, sit up, and realize your neck feels like it's slept in a pretzel. A soft cough from the corner reminds you you're not alone. The yurt's a shared space, and everyone from babies to grandmothers to that one guy who snored like a low-speed cart slept inches away. Today you learn the sacred rhythm of chores. It starts with the animals again. They need milking, lots of milking. Cows, goats, sheep, and especially mares. Mare's milk is gold here, not just for drinking, but for fermenting into air, a lightly alcoholic beverage that somehow tastes like a fizzy cheese smoothie. You'll get used to it. You're handed a low stool, a wooden pail, and an encouraging look that says, let's see how you mess this up. Your first goat gives you the side eye. You reach forward, channeling every rustic movie montage you've ever seen, and promptly get kicked in the shin. Milking is an art. It's rhythm trust, and if you're honest, a bit of trickery. You eventually coax out a thin stream, and someone nods. Not bad, not great, but you didn't get headbutted, which apparently earns a gold star. Here's your historical fact for the day. Mongol women did most of the milking and dairy processing, and they turned raw milk into a dizzying array of products: yogurt, cream, butter, and curds. Some families even specialized in dairy trade, with carts full of fermented milk sloshing across the steppe like nomadic ice cream trucks. Meanwhile, the kids are already working. One boy chops kindling with a small axe. A girl is expertly braiding her sister's hair while stirring porridge with her foot. Okay, not really, but she could if needed. You're sent outside with a bucket of fresh dung. No, not to dump it, to dry it. Because dung is fuel. Soft, dry, slow-burning, and always available. You spread the patties on a rack near the yurt, where the sun bakes them into crispy, flammable pancakes. It's weirdly satisfying, like you're prepping the world's least appetizing brunch. Now a fun little fringe tidbit: some Mongol families created dung art, laying the patties in ornate circular patterns around the yurt. It served no direct purpose except maybe announcing, yes, we're practical, but also we have style. Later you help churn milk in a leather bag called a kukur, hung from a tripod and swayed back and forth like a sleepy metronome. You're told to keep it moving for hours, which feels like an ancient test of willpower. Eventually, the milk separates, cream floats to the top, butter is skimmed, curds are set out to dry. Everything has a place. Everything is used. Historians still argue whether this intense daily labor kept Mongol society stable or simply left little room for drama. With everyone engaged in essential tasks from dawn to dusk, there wasn't much time to, say, start a family feud over yurt decor. But it also meant life was deeply communal, no room for loners or slackers. Lunch is modest, a bowl of milk porridge and some dried meat softened in broth. You've begun to appreciate the textures of this life, the way food feels earned, how each chore links to the next like beads on a string. Even fetching water is an expedition, walking to a nearby stream or ice hole with wooden buckets, swinging from each hand like medieval kettlebells. You catch a grandmother spinning wool. Her hands blur with practiced speed, twisting tufts into long strands of yarn. Nearby, a teenage boy hammers iron into a horseshoe, using an anvil wedged into the dirt. A younger child sharpens a knife that looks older than any of you. Skills aren't hobbies here. They're inherited, vital, and respected. By 10, a child might know how to sew, cook, train a horse, and defend the livestock from wolves. You, by comparison, just learned how to properly sit on a stool without tipping over. Still, you're learning, slowly. The chores that seemed random at first now form a cycle synchronized with sun and season. Morning milking, midday spinning, afternoon tending, evening repair. Everything you do ensures someone eats, someone rests, someone survives. You start to notice how chore time also doubles as story time. As hands work, mouths move, retelling old legends, arguing over clan tales, or quietly humming songs that haven't changed in centuries. One man even recites a riddle so complex it takes the group 20 minutes to solve. The answer is a shadow, but honestly, you were leaning toward a yurt with feelings. Eventually, the sun slants again, casting everything in amber. The last chores are wrapped up. A woman patches a felt flap. A boy oils saddle straps. Someone braids rawhide rope with swift, sure fingers. These aren't chores. They're acts of continuity, a way of saying, we were here, we endured, we remember. As night approaches, the final task is lighting the fire again, with dung, again, with care. The yurt warms, the day fades. And you sit quietly, hands a little sore, heart strangely full, wondering what tomorrow's rhythm will bring. Outside, the wind begins to pick up, sweeping across the steppe, like an invisible hand brushing over a massive field of velvet. The grass whispers in long sighs, and the sun pulls low toward the horizon, casting everything in honeyed light. You're standing just outside the yurt now, hands still tingling from the day's work, eyes squinting toward the animal pens. It's time for evening rounds. The livestock aren't just animals, they're survival. And tonight they need to be gathered, checked, and protected. You start with the sheep. They're scattered like lazy clouds, grazing until the very last minute. You flap your coat, give a few practiced shouts, and soon they're ambling back toward the pen, completely ignoring you, but doing what they're supposed to anyway. You notice the herders using slings, long cords of woven wool, with a pouch in the middle to whip small stones in the air, not to hit the animals, but to startle them gently back into formation. It's both practical and poetic, like shepherding with a rhythm section. You try one. The stone flies backwards. Everyone laughs. Here's your historical fact. Mongol herders used these slings for centuries, not just for animals, but as a lightweight weapon in emergencies. They were so skilled with them that some riders could direct a whole herd while galloping beside it, never needing to dismount. Herding wasn't a chore. It was a high-skill performance. You work your way to the goats, who are, let's face it, jerks, cute jerks. They bleat at you like you're late for a meeting. One tries to nibble your sash. Another climbs a rock for no reason. Eventually, with some light cursing under your breath, PG-rated, of course, you get them moving. The cows follow, slower, more stubborn, but also somehow wiser. One old cow stares at you in a way that makes you question your life choices. You bow slightly, respect. And finally, the horses, the pride of the Mongol soul. These aren't just transportation. They're family status livelihood, and occasionally warm milk providers. Mongols grew up in the saddle. Some children could ride before they could walk. You watch a boy of maybe 7 mount a small horse with the ease of someone slipping into their favorite hoodie. No saddle, no reins, just balance, muscle memory, and quiet authority. One older man invites you to help with tethering. You walk among the horses, cautiously trying not to make sudden moves or broadcast your beginner energy too loudly. The animals snort and stamp, but they tolerate you. One even lets you stroke its mane. It's coarse, thick, and dusted with dried salt from a long day's sweat. Here's your fringe tidbit. Mongols sometimes communicated with their horses using throat singing, not full melodies but low rhythmic hums that helped calm the animals or coax them into routines. You try a gentle sound, and to your surprise, one horse perks its ears and steps closer. Either it's responding or it thinks you're humming about hay. The animals are brought into a rough corral made of woven brush and logs, a circular layout easy to defend, easy to spot from afar. The young herders do a final head count, their eyes flicking over the crowd with laser focus. One calf is missing. Within minutes, 2 teens are riding out into the dusk. No panic, just precision. They return half an hour later, calf in tow, scolded gently and nudged into place. Historians still argue whether Mongol success came more from their strategy or their horse culture. On one hand, yes, their battle tactics were legendary. On the other, no other empire was so deeply in sync with the lives and rhythms of animals. Their mobility, resilience, and communication all hinged on a human-animal partnership honed over lifetimes. As the sky dims, someone lights a small fire near the pen, not for heat, just for comfort. A visual signal that the animals are safe and the day's last task is complete. You sit on a rock sipping leftover sute tsai from a wooden cup, its warmth pooling in your hands. The stars begin to pop one by one like cautious party guests peeking through the curtain. The yurt glows behind you. The herders sit in a quiet line, their boots dusty, their faces unreadable in the firelight. One man hums softly, something between a lullaby and a weather report. You don't understand the words, but the feeling is clear gratitude. You didn't think an evening spent organizing livestock could be this calming. But there's something profoundly reassuring about it. Every step matters. Every goat matters. The same routine repeated across generations, anchoring life in a world that otherwise shifts like sand. Someone hands you a small cloth bundle. Inside is a charm, a tiny leather pouch filled with herbs, hair, and what looks like a flake of animal bone. A protection talisman, they explain, for your next ride. You thank them. You don't plan to ride anywhere soon, but it's a kind gesture. And besides, who doesn't need a little supernatural backup? You stand, stretch, yawn. The wind has stilled now. The animals huff softly in their sleep. Somewhere a dog howls a long, low note that fades like a breath. You tuck the charm into your robe pocket. Tomorrow you'll help groom the horses, maybe learn how to tie a halter, maybe not fall into a dung pile. Progress. For now, though, you walk back to the yurt. The felt door is open just a crack, glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. You step inside. Inside, the yurt warmth wraps around you like a blanket pulled straight from the fire. The hearth glows low, just a dull bed of embers, now casting orange shadows that dance across the walls. Everyone's winding down. Boots are off, blankets are unrolled. You hear soft chatter, tonight's recap light teasing half-finished jokes. Someone's knitting and someone else is cleaning their fingernails with a knife the size of a sandwich. Casual. You ease into your corner, back against a rolled-up saddlebag, and start to take stock of your day. It's been long, dusty, full of things you never imagined doing with such earnestness, like singing to horses and drying dung in artistic spirals. And now here you are in a felt-walled tent on the edge of forever, with the stars just outside and the smell of wool and wood smoke curling in your nose. But don't get too comfortable yet, because tonight is bath night. Yes, bath night. And no, not a spa with eucalyptus steam and lo-fi music. This is the steamy, smoky, sometimes slightly chaotic world of the Mongol bagana, a kind of sweat bath or makeshift sauna built outdoors with stones heated in fire pits and thrown into water basins to release thick, fragrant steam. You follow the others out into the dark to a small, semi-sheltered area where hot stones are already glowing in a pit surrounded by buckets of water. A hide screen shields the area from wind. It's rough, a little mysterious, and kind of thrilling, like an ancient speakeasy, but for hygiene. You undress quickly, modestly, and huddle in close. Water sizzles as it hits the stones, sending up clouds of heat and vapor. You feel your skin loosen your pores, wake up, and your whole body sigh as if it's been waiting for this moment since you first milked that grumpy goat. Here's your historical fact. Mongol communities did indeed use rudimentary sweat baths, sometimes incorporating medicinal herbs like juniper or wild onion to cleanse the body and ward off sickness. It wasn't just about washing, it was spiritual, a cleansing of the outside and inside, especially before rituals or long journeys. Someone starts humming a low, droning tune while another person rhythmically flicks water onto the rocks. Steam builds. The air turns thick. Your hair clings to your head. And then someone cracks a joke, something about smelling like smoked cheese now. Everyone laughs. And here's your odd tidbit. According to some fringe accounts, Mongol warriors believed that steam bathing before battle helped scare away evil spirits by making you too slippery for them to cling to. Historians debate this, of course. Some say it's exaggerated folklore. Others argue there's precedent in Central Asian purification customs. You don't know who's right, but at this point, you'd believe anything about a culture where fermented milk and fire-warmed horse gear coexist peacefully. After a solid half hour of sweating, rinsing, and sharing ghost stories, you emerge into the night, feeling reborn. Your skin tingles, your mind buzzes softly like the yurt itself is purring in approval. You dry off quickly with a wool cloth and redress in layers of cotton and fur. It's a shock going from steamy cave to frosty steppe, but it sharpens you, makes you feel more real. Back in the yurt, it's dinner time. A late meal, simple and grounding, boiled dumplings stuffed with minced mutton, onions, and spices, floating in a light broth. Booze, they're called. You're told the best ones always have a little air pocket inside, like a steamed kiss. You burn your tongue slightly, but pretend it's fine. Here's a detail worth noting: no individual plates. Instead, one big communal bowl passed around with carved wooden spoons. There's a rhythm to it, like a slow circle dance. Take a bite, pass it on, smile, nod, continue. There's fermented mare's milk on the side again. You brace yourself. It still tastes like dairy soda, but it's less weird now. You're adapting, and someone claps you on the back, laughing. First week's the worst, they say. You nod, mouthful of dumpling, pretending you knew that. As the meal winds down, a man pulls out a morin kur, a traditional two-stringed instrument with a carved horse head on top. He sets it against his knee and begins to play. The sound that emerges is haunting, like wind weeping across empty plains. It vibrates in your chest and makes your ears feel like they're remembering something ancient. People hush. The fire dims, and slowly you're drawn into the song's pull. Here's something to muse on. Historians still argue whether Mongol music influenced other nomadic cultures or if they all evolved similar styles from shared environments. Either way, the tunes are built for openness. Long notes, minor keys, like melodies meant to echo over the hills for miles. You're not just hearing it, you're breathing it in. After a few songs, someone begins to recite a tale. A real epic. Not a bedtime story, but one of those great-grandfather fought the sky god kind of legends. It's dramatic, funny, a little confusing, and full of shape-shifting foxes and surprise rainstorms. You're entranced, or maybe delirious, either way you don't mind. Eventually, the yurt grows quieter. One by one, people crawl into their bedding layers of felt, hide, and wool, arranged like personal nests. You follow suit, tucking yourself into your own cozy corner. Someone snores gently. Someone sighs. The fire cracks one last time. You stare at the ceiling, the wheel of the yurt roof like a sunburst above your head. The sky beyond it is ink black. No streetlights, no buzzing phones, just the slow rhythm of ancient life drawn in loops around your heart. Your body is clean. Your mind is still. Your dreams tonight will be stitched together from smoke, wind, and horsehair. Sleep now, you've earned it. You wake to a world washed in soft silver. The yurt is still, but outside early birds, or maybe early goats, are already making themselves known. You blink slowly, cocooned in layers of wool and fur, the smell of last night's fire still clinging gently to the air. It's cold. Not cruelly so, but just enough that your breath fogs in the sliver of sunlight creeping through the roof wheel. Someone's already up. You hear a pot clinking, a few murmured words, a gentle rustling of boots on packed earth. A kettle starts to hiss. There's no alarm clock, just the rhythm of necessity. You stretch out a little, muscles aching in that good, I've been useful way. Then, with some reluctance, you unwrap yourself from your bedding and step into the chill. Outside, the steppe glows under a pale sun. Dew sparkles on tufts of grass. A horse snorts somewhere, and the family is already busy morning chores in full swing, quiet and practice. You're handed a warm cup of sauté tsai, salty milk tea again. At this point, it's practically your love language. But today's work is different. Today, you're not just tending or watching. Today, you're learning something sacred. You're going to help build a yurt. Not from scratch, thankfully, but there's an old one being repaired on the far side of the camp, and your hands are needed. This isn't some weekend workshop. This is architecture nomadic style. An art form passed through generations, assembled without a single nail. You walk over, mug in hand, to where the frame has already been dismantled. Lattice walls called kana stacked neatly in bundles. The central roof supports uni, lying beside the wooden crown or tuno, which looks like a wagon wheel and weighs about as much as one. Your historical fact of the day: the Mongol Yurt, or gur as it's properly called, is designed to be both sturdy and portable. It can be packed onto a camel in under an hour or set up by a small team in just as long. No concrete, no screws, just geometry, tension, and the knowledge of where every stick goes. You begin by helping unfold the wall lattices. Each crisscrossed piece of wood opens like an accordion, stretching into a circular enclosure. You hold your section upright as others fasten the edges together with leather cords. It's simple, but genius. The walls can flex with the wind, but hold strong against it too. Nature-tested, battle-approved. Then come the roof poles, the uni. They're long and slightly curved, each one fitting into the central ring and resting on the tops of the lattice wall. You watch as the tuno is lifted onto two tall posts. It's awkward, a bit like balancing a wheel on chopsticks, but once it's up, the rest begins to flow. You hold one pole in your hand. It's warm from the sun, smooth from decades of use. You slot it in, a perfect fit. One by one, the circle forms. The yurt is reborn. Fringe tidbit time: some yurts are passed down for generations with parts made from ancestor trees or painted with symbolic designs. In some regions, the number of roof poles is chosen for spiritual reasons, 41 being especially auspicious. You count quietly. 41. Nice. As the frame settles, a woman gestures for you to help with the felt. Great. Now you're playing with giant blankets. These thick, woolly mats are draped over the frame in layers like dressing a turtle for winter. You heave one over your shoulder. It's heavier than it looks, and you stagger just slightly. Someone laughs and helps you adjust. You mutter something about leg day and keep going. Here's where the whole process turns artistic. The felt isn't just tossed on randomly. There's a system overlapping seams for insulation, specific tie-down points to prevent flapping, and decorative outer cloth to reflect family identity. You see patterns stitched into the fabric, swirls, knots, symbolic animal shapes, a language of felt and thread. Historians still argue someone says smiling at your sweat-soaked effort, whether the first yurts came from Mongolia or Kazakhstan. The speaker is half joking, but it's a real debate. Nomadic cultures across Central Asia have similar dwellings, and the origin story remains cloudy. What's clear, though, is that the Mongol Yurt is king of the genre, timeless, efficient, and basically windproof. As the yurt takes shape, you're invited to help with the final touch, the door. Always facing south, they tell you. Why better sun, better feng shui, fewer demons? Take your pick. The door is wooden, often painted in bold colors, reds, oranges, blues, with intricate carvings. It's not just a way in or out. It's a statement welcome. This is our world. Step inside carefully. You lift the door into place. It clicks into the frame almost smugly. The entire yurt seems to exhale, done, standing proud. You brush the dust off your hands, grin like a lunatic, and step back to admire your handiwork. It's beautiful, not in a grand palace way, but in the way of something perfect for its purpose. A circle of survival, a poem in wood and wool. The others nod, pleased. You've done well. They offer you a spot of dried cheese as a reward. It's hard enough to chip a tooth on, but you chew it proudly. You sit for a moment looking at the yurt, your legs sore, your hands splintery, and your heart strangely lighter. You helped make this. You understand it now, not just the structure, but the way of life it represents. A home that moves, a circle that contains the sky, a design so clever it's barely changed in 1,000 years. And now, with the wind rising again and the clouds starting to gather on the horizon, the yurt is ready for another season, another generation, another story. You run a hand across the doorframe as you walk back. The wood is warm. You built that. The wind kicks up again in the late afternoon, and with the newly repaired yurt standing proud behind you, it's time to tackle one of the quieter but still essential parts of nomadic life: clothing care. Not Fashion Week drama, more like, if I don't scrub this tunic today, it might walk off on its own. You settle near a shallow basin where someone is already elbow-deep in soapy water, scrubbing what looks like a sock with the tenacity of a medieval MMA fighter. A bar of homemade soap, lumpy off-white and vaguely cheese-smelling, is passed to you. It's made from animal fat and ash, and though it doesn't lather like modern stuff, it gets the job done. You take your shirt, a once proud cotton number, now more dust than fabric, and begin the slow, methodical process of soaking, scrubbing, and rinsing. There's no hot tap, no gentle cycle, just cold water, stiff fabric, and the steady rhythm of human effort. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol garments were typically made from wool felt or leather. Cotton and silk were prized and often imported from China or the Middle East through trade routes like the Silk Road. Most people wore long tunics called deal, belted at the waist, and often layered with vests or coats depending on the season. You've seen the deal up close now, simple cuts but clever, no buttons, just fabric loops and ties, designed for mobility and comfort in a saddle. There's elegance in the efficiency, and you wonder how many modern wardrobes would survive 3 days on the steppe, let alone an entire migration season. Your host's mother, who's been eyeing your laundry skills with a smirk, leans over and begins teaching you how to soften the wool. This involves soaking it in a mixture of warm water, fermented mare's milk, and yes, a touch of animal urine. Natural enzymes, she says, with a wink. You try not to gag, but she's already laughing. City noses are too delicate. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some Mongol communities reportedly used powdered horse hooves and charcoal in their laundry water, not just for cleaning, but as a sort of clothing treatment that added durability. Whether this actually worked or was just an ancient placebo remains up for debate. Historians still argue whether these unconventional cleaning methods improved fabric longevity or simply made the clothing smell vaguely like a burnt barn. Your sleeves are now wetter than your clothes, but there's something meditative about the process. Rub, rinse, twist, hang. You pin your shirt to a drying rope strung between two saddles. It flaps in the wind like a victory flag for people who've discovered that deodorant is a very modern luxury. Later, you help the children gather thistle and wild onion bulbs, not for dinner but for dyeing fabric. The roots are boiled down in a clay pot over a low flame, releasing a surprisingly lovely purple tint. The smell, though, is bold, very nature-forward. One of the older boys dips a swatch of linen into the dye and pulls it out rich with color. Another mixes a darker hue using crushed beetles. You try not to ask too many questions about that one. As your shirt dries in the sun, you join a few of the women as they sort through storage sacks inside the yurt. This is where the real treasure lies, mended. Socks, scrap leather, old arrow fletchings, broken sewing needles, a single copper coin, and what looks suspiciously like the lid of a Chinese tea jar. In a nomadic household, nothing is truly junk. It's just future usefulness waiting to be realized. They show you how they store extra felt in rolls scented with dried herbs to keep away insects, and how they hang bundles of horsehair rope from the ceiling rafters to keep them dry. There's a system. Everything has a place. Even the dust feels like it knows its boundaries. Dinner that night is humble leftover dumplings fried in mutton, fat slices of dried curd, arul, and a thin soup made from turnips and boiled bones. It's not luxurious, but it's warm and filling, and by now you're too tired to be picky. Someone hands you a small bundle of goat wool and a spindle. Spin, they say. You laugh, they don't, so you try. The wool tangles, the spindle wobbles. Your fingers forget how to be fingers, but slowly, painfully, you begin to twist a length of lumpy thread. It's not beautiful, but it's yours. Another lesson in patience, another quiet reminder even the softest things require work. And just as you're congratulating yourself for not snapping the thread, one of the kids taps your shoulder and whispers, "Tomorrow we herd sheep all day." You blink. "Long walk," they add. "We pack cheese." You glance at your drying shirt, your sore hands, your aching calves, then you sigh, sip your salty tea, and mutter, "Bring it on." Because that's the thing. Somewhere between soap made from tallow and the surprisingly competitive world of felt drying, you've started to blend in. You're no longer the outsider asking questions with your eyebrows. You're the one squinting at the horizon, wondering which hill hides the sheep and whether your clothes will dry by morning. You're not quite Mongol, but you're not entirely not either. And as you lean back against the yurt's inner wall, the fire crackling low, and the spindle still spinning lazily in your hand, you think maybe this was always the point. To slow down, to wash something with care, to wear what you helped clean, to laugh at the smell and live in the wind. You exhale, eyes heavy, and let the rhythm of the camp settle around you like a blanket. Tomorrow more dust, more sheep, more cheese. But for now, you've earned your rest. Morning comes on little cat feet, as the poet said, though in your case, it's more like goat feet thundering across the earth as the herders rally the flock. You wake to the unmistakable bleat of ambition and the distant shouting of someone who sounds entirely too cheerful for 5 a.m. Outside, the world is blue and gold. Dew sparkles across the plain, and your now clean shirt smells faintly of smoked sour milk and heroism. You pull it on with some pride, belt your borrowed deal, and step out into the organized chaos of sheep herding day. Today, you are livestock logistics. You're handed a long stick, part shepherd's tool, part confidence booster, and given a vague point on the horizon. That way they gesture. You and 3 others are tasked with driving a few dozen sheep toward a distant grazing zone. The sheep have other ideas. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol herders practiced transhumance, moving herds seasonally across hundreds of miles to take advantage of different pastures. It required intimate knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and animal behavior, not to mention leg muscles of steel. You begin walking. The sheep follow mostly. Occasionally one turns around like it's got a job interview back at the yurt. You wave your stick in a vaguely intimidating way. It works about 40% of the time. Eventually you learn to rely more on sound, clucks, hisses, sharp whistles. Apparently, sheep respond better to attitude than threats. Who knew? Along the way, you pass another family's camp. Their yurt looks familiar, same size, same layout, but with a slightly more elaborate door and what appears to be a solar panel strapped to a post. A kid sits beside it, charging a weather radio. You blink. Welcome to the 13th century with a USB port. Fringe tidbit for you. Some modern Mongol herders use motorcycles to move their flocks. Others still prefer the horse. And some, in true fusion fashion, herd sheep by motorbike while wearing AirPods. The past and future cohabitate nicely out here. You walk for hours. The land rolls in soft swells, grass brushing your boots, the wind forever at your side. Occasionally a herder calls out a tune, half sung, half yelled across the hills. It echoes in strange and lovely ways, part lullaby, part signal. Historians still argue, one of your companions says, as you crest a small rise, whether these songs are descended from ancient Turkic melodies or developed independently. You nod sagely, pretending you didn't just trip on a rock. At the top of the hill, you break for tea. Again. Your body now operates on sutate psi as much as blood. A sheep nibbles your sleeve while you're distracted. You shoo it off, then apologize to it out of habit. The grazing area is marked by nothing more than familiarity. There are no fences, no signs, just knowledge. The older herders remember the shape of each valley, the shade of each boulder. You watch as they read the landscape like a story they've heard since birth. The sheep scatter and stay. It's oddly satisfying watching them munch contentedly, oblivious to how much effort went into guiding them here. One young boy begins playing a morinkur, a horsehead fiddle from atop a small rock. The sound is haunting and gentle, like the wind singing its own memory. You lie back in the grass, arms behind your head, and let the music and sunlight carry you. Your boots are dusty, your face is sunburnt, but your heart feels oddly full. A large hawk circles overhead. Someone points out a marmot burrow in the distance. Another kid tries to throw a rock at it, misses entirely, and laughs like it's the greatest joke in Mongolia. Eventually, it's time to round the flock and start back. The sheep are less eager this time, fat and sleepy, but you've learned their rhythms now. You walk slow, you whistle occasionally, you resist the urge to name them. Back at camp, it's late afternoon. You're sun-drunk and sheep-weary, but the feeling is good, a shared tiredness that binds everyone. You hand your stick back to its owner and say something vaguely wise like, "They're willful, but fair." You're not sure what that means, but it earns a chuckle. Dinner is waiting, grilled organ meat skewers and more fermented mare's milk. You eat like you've just invented hunger. Someone passes you a small cake made of fried dough and sugar. It tastes like a miracle. Later, as twilight settles and the stars begin their slow ascent, you sit around the central hearth, watching flames flicker on smiling faces. One of the older men begins a story, something about a camel that ran off with someone's boots. It's half true, probably, and completely delightful. Someone hands you a length of braided horsehair and shows you how to tie a basic rope knot. It's symbolic, they say. Useful, too. You try, fail, and try again. Life out here is one long lesson in knot tying, literal and otherwise. You glance over at the sheep pen. The flock is still huddled together like a living cloud, and you realize something today you didn't just observe. You contributed. You mattered. The yurt glows in the dark like a lantern, and you feel its pull. Your bedroll waits. Your sore feet have already filed a complaint, but your spirit, oddly enough, is still buzzing. Buzzing with the rhythm of hooves and fiddles and fire, with wool and dust and warm tea. And somewhere inside you understand what few ever do. This isn't just history. It's a heartbeat that never stopped. You step inside, ducking through the low door. The coals are still glowing. A small child is already asleep, curled against a wool blanket. You settle into your corner, pull the heavy felt around your shoulders, and whisper goodnight to the sheep, the stars, and whatever part of yourself now belongs to this place. You wake to the scent of butter sizzling in a pan and the sound of hoofbeats not far from your head. Outside the yurt, the air is brisk just enough to remind you you're alive, but not so cruel you'll regret emerging from the blankets. Someone's already started breakfast, which you now know means meat tea and whatever's been fermenting under a cloth since last week. There's a deep, comfortable rhythm here. Fire crackles, kettles, hiss, voices murmur just loudly enough to be heard over the breeze. Today is trading day. There's no medieval bazaar with silk banners flapping in the wind, no caravanserai teeming with jewel merchants and camel barons. Instead, there's a kind of mobile rolling economy, neighbors and distant relatives converging from across the steppe, sometimes on horseback, sometimes in rickety carts pulled by yaks. You help pack the offering skeins of hand-spun wool, dried curds, and a hide that's been tanned so thoroughly it smells like a very expensive wallet. Someone adds a small tin of pine resin and 3 carved bone buttons. Good for bartering, your host mutters. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongol Empire maintained a complex trade network during its height, connecting east and west across the Silk Road. But even among common herders, localized trade was critical. Families exchanged goods through barter systems, no coins necessary, unless dealing with foreign merchants or city folk. You set off with the group in the early light, the yurt shrinking behind you as the wide open plain seems to unfold forever. The ride is long, but not unpleasant. You sit sideways on the cart legs, swinging, watching the landscape blur in slow-motion gold. The makeshift trade post is nothing more than a cluster of carts and yurts that sprouted like mushrooms overnight. Fires smoke lazily, horses snort and shift, and people greet each other with big unhurried hugs and a shared look that says, "We made it. We're still standing." It's low-tech, high-trust economics. A woman from another camp offers thick felt boots in exchange for your spun wool. Someone else wants goat cheese for sewing needles. You catch a glimpse of an ivory-handled comb, clearly from China. It disappears into someone's sash before you can even blink. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some Mongol traders were known to carry squirrel pelts dyed with local herbs, used not just for warmth but as currency in fringe economies. Historians still argue whether these peculiar pelt currencies were standardized or more symbolic, like the way your cousin insists a gift card counts as cash. You spot a group examining a round, lumpy object with deep reverence. Turns out it's a wheel of camel milk cheese aged for nearly a year. Apparently it's like gold around here. A heated discussion ensues about whether it's worth 3 or 4 winter coats. You wander through the scene, soaking it all in. There's a man repairing a horse bridle with twine made of braided gut. A child barters a polished stone for a handful of dried apricots. Nearby, 2 elders argue amicably over who once cheated whom in a game of ankle bone toss back in 1207. Someone plays a 2-stringed lute. A few people dance. It's not a party, but it could be. A gray-bearded herder invites you to share his booze-steamed dumplings filled with lamb and onion. You accept, grateful and hungry, They're juicy, savory, and somehow better eaten cross-legged on the ground with dust in your tea. Then just like that, the market begins to fade. People load their carts. Goods are bundled back into sacks. Yurts are taken down faster than you'd think possible, like watching someone fold up a house and tuck it under their arm. You help reload your group's cart. The sun hangs low now, and the wind picks up just enough to flutter the edges of your scarf. You watch as a small girl tucks her new pair of mittens, red and woolly, into her coat with the kind of joy you remember from birthday mornings as a kid. On the ride back, your companions talk trade gossip. Someone got a good deal on salt. Someone else traded a teapot for a goat with a limp. The goat, of course, is now herding other goats like some kind of wounded general. Back at camp, you unpack your haul. One of the old women unwraps a new spindle with deep reverence. Someone else tests out a pair of shears on a practice patch of wool. It's humble, quiet celebration, but real. There's a strange satisfaction in knowing that everything earned today came not from currency, but from skill, labor, and human connection. You weren't shopping. You were participating in a system older than banks. That evening, a feast of sorts takes shape, not lavish, but special. The prized camel cheese is shared, just a sliver per person. Someone roasts a fatty cut of mutton over the open flame. There's a drink passed around made from fermented grains that burns slightly on the way down. You lean back, belly full, watching sparks disappear into a sky littered with stars. There's laughter around you, the kind that feels heavier than sound laughter, born from survival, from trading stories as much as goods. And here it comes again, that strange hum in your chest. The slow realization that the world isn't just spinning, it's spinning under you, with you, because of people like these. People who can tell the value of a cheese wheel just by sniffing it. Who can swap a ball of yarn for a half-dozen sewing needles and walk away richer for it, who can live off what they make with their hands and share it without second thought. It's not just a market, it's memory, motion, a heartbeat beneath the steppe. And as you crawl into your yurt that night, your pockets emptier but your soul heavier, you realize something unexpected. You didn't buy anything today. You just took part in something priceless. The next morning greets you with a yawn of pale light spilling in through the yurt's smoke hole. It's a slow start today, no urgent sheep herding, no trade caravans rumbling off into the horizon, just the low rustle of someone turning a saddlebag inside out and the usual clatter of breakfast in progress. You stretch every bone, making itself known, and take a moment to really breathe in the air. It's got that dusty, sweet steppe flavor again, grass, ash, and horse. If you bottled it, you could call it Mongol Musk Eau de Yurt. Today's theme, leisure, if that word can even apply to a culture where free time usually means time to fix everything that's about to break. You head outside, and it's clear you're not the only one feeling the lull. Someone is repairing the cart axle with a curious mix of leather cord patience and quietly muttered swearing. Another is combing a horse's tail as if the equine has a big date later. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongol life, while often romanticized as purely warlike, actually included structured downtime. Days between migrations or after major tasks were used for craftwork, animal care, games, music, and storytelling. Leisure wasn't wasted time, it was preparation and preservation. You're given a small task, cleaning out the milking bucket. It's not glamorous, but there's something kind of meditative about it. You sit by the water basin, scrubbing with grass and a handful of coarse salt, watching a beetle struggle dramatically over a stone beside you. One of the older kids invites you to play shagai, a traditional game using dried sheep ankle bones. These little knuckle bones are surprisingly versatile. They're used like dice jacks and even marbles. Each side has a name: horse, goat, camel, or sheep, and depending on how they land, you score points or lose your dignity. You flick a bone, it lands on horse. Everyone cheers like you just won the World Cup. Fringe, tidbit time. Some Mongol families keep ancestral shagai bones passed down through generations. These are believed to bring luck and, in some cases, used for fortune-telling. Historians still argue whether this practice predates Mongol unification or emerged later with shamanistic fusion. You're terrible at the game, but no one seems to mind. An elder pats your shoulder, either encouraging you or subtly telling you to aim better. Another child takes over and immediately nails a triple horse combo. You suspect witchcraft. Later, you join a group of women carding wool. It's slow, rhythmic work combing and fluffing wool until it's ready to be spun. You're handed a carding comb and told not to poke your own leg. You do? Twice. The conversation drifts from gossip. Did you see how much she overpaid for that camel cheese to jokes? That sheep looked at me like it owed me money. The laughter here is a soft, bubbling kind, shared not because things are funny, but because they're shared. As the sun reaches its zenith, someone starts preparing bortsoga deep-fried dope pastries. They're light, slightly sweet, and entirely addictive. You burn your tongue on the first one. Worth it. After lunch, a visiting cousin brings out a small, worn leather pouch. Inside dice a folded felt mat and something suspiciously like medieval poker chips. You're ushered into a round of knucklebone betting, and suddenly the relaxed afternoon has stakes. You don't win much, mostly admiration for your bold strategy of playing goat when you clearly should have played camel. But it's fun, and that's the whole point. As shadows begin to stretch across the steppe, you help gather kindling for the evening fire. Not because anyone tells you to, just because it feels natural now. You know where the best dry twigs are. You know to avoid the thorn bushes. You're becoming competent. That night, the stars arrive early. The sky above the steppe doesn't just twinkle, it floods. Every constellation you half remember from childhood is suddenly alive. Someone points out the Great Bear. Someone else insists that no, it's a yak. You sit beside a group as a young man tunes his moran kur. The horsehead fiddle hums low and soft, the sound like a warm breeze whispering through wood. He begins to play a song that feels more like a story. No words, just rising notes drifting like smoke, looping into themselves and back out again. One woman begins to sing along softly at first, then with confidence. You don't understand the words, but the tone tells you everything. Longing, strength, memory. The fire pops at the perfect moment like punctuation. Here's a fun callback. Remember that bone-combing, tea-chugging, slightly overwhelmed version of yourself from a few days ago. You're still them, but also not. Now you know how to cut wool, throw ankle bones, and sit just right to avoid yurt smoke in the eyes. Historians still argue one of the elders mutters as they stir the fire with a stick, whether leisure was a true luxury for the Mongols or simply another form of work disguised as rest. You sip your tea and think maybe it doesn't matter, because here everything seems to exist in that in-between space, work and play, silence and song, labor and leisure. As the music slows and people begin to yawn, you lay back, head resting on your folded coat, eyes full of constellations. Your shoulders ache in that pleasant way that says you've done enough. Your feet are sore, but no longer confused about where they belong. And as the flames dim and the wind settles into its quiet lullaby, you feel that you've become not just a guest here, but a thread in the fabric, a wrinkle in the yurt wall, a joke someone will repeat when you're long gone. You pull your blanket around you, hear someone snore and smile in the dark. Not every day needs a battle or a hero's arc. Sometimes all you need is a good dumpling, a lucky bone toss, and the kind of silence that makes your heart feel full. You rise to the quiet shuffling of boots on packed earth and the groaning of wooden joints, someone's yurt door warped by time and weather. The air this morning is different, cooler, sharper, the kind of air that makes animals restless and elders glance up at the clouds like they're reading old secrets. Today the yurt will be packed. You knew it was coming, everyone did. It's migration time again. Out here the idea of home is fluid. It doesn't cling to a place, it clings to people, to felt walls, to hearth smoke, to the creak of a saddle leather and the soft grunt of a loaded yak. Inside the yurt, everything is moving. Blankets are being folded, saddlebags stuffed, cooking pots stacked with that odd efficiency that comes only from endless repetition. You're handed a bundle of ropes and told gently, but with absolutely zero room for negotiation, to start rolling the wall felt. It's surprisingly satisfying work. The thick wool compresses like a giant sponge. You roll it tighter and tighter, arms aching until it's just a dense, fuzzy cylinder. It smells like smoke goat in old summers. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mongols traditionally migrated several times a year following seasonal pasture shifts. This mobility was not chaotic. It was strategic, tied to centuries of inherited knowledge about where grasses would regrow, where winter winds could be avoided, and where water wouldn't freeze too early. As the structure comes down, you see the skeleton of the yurt for what it is: collapsible, mathematical, elegant. Like someone designed IKEA furniture, but with centuries of engineering insight and zero need for instructions. The wooden lattice walls, the central roof, ring, the tonneau, and the sloping poles all come apart in a specific sequence. It's not frantic, it's not even noisy, just efficient. Someone hums a tune that matches the pace of disassembly. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some Mongol families would etch tiny markings or burn symbols into their yurt poles to ensure they were always reassembled in the same orientation, believing it preserved household harmony. Historians still argue whether these symbols had spiritual significance or were just early sticky notes. You help tie the felt bundles to the side of a cart. Every object has a place. Blankets here, saddles there. The teapot gets a whole canvas wrap because heaven forbid it crack. After all, it's the unsung hero of morning morale. The camp begins to empty. Yurts deflated like tired balloons. Children help herd the slower goats, coaxing them along with high-pitched encouragements, and when necessary, a nudge from a stick. You're invited to ride with the older women today, a place of quiet wisdom, sarcasm, and incredible core strength. The cart is bumpy, but the view is cinematic. Endless grasslands touched by golden light, distant ridgelines softened by mist. Conversation flows between silences. Someone tells you about a river 2 days ahead full of fish and lazy curves. Someone else recalls a storm that nearly blew their yurt into a ravine, but the dog held the flap closed with his teeth. She says, entirely serious. You pass small landmarks, an outcropping shaped like a crouched man, a lone tree where birds always seem to congregate, a boulder split perfectly down the center. They're not marked on maps, but everyone knows them. They're the memory stones of the land. Midway through the journey, the group stops to let the animals graze. A fire is sparked in under 2 minutes. Tea is brewed in 3. You wonder if Mongol grandmothers could survive a zombie apocalypse purely by force of will and thermos logic. Lunch is dried meat, dense cheese, and a handful of wild onions. Someone foraged en route. You eat sitting on a folded saddlebag, watching the shadows stretch like lazy cats across the ground. By evening, the new camp location is reached, a shallow valley with wind protection and fresh grass. The animals scatter happily. The humans do not. They begin the yurt ballet once again. You'd think after a full day of travel, everyone would want to nap. Nope. The yurt must rise, and it does faster this time. Everyone moves like clockwork. You know where to hold, when to duck, how to loop the felt so it doesn't sag. It's the same yurt, but somehow in a new spot it feels like a new beginning. You lay out the bedding, your motions now practiced. A dog curls up at your feet. A pot is already on the fire. Smoke curls upward into a sky blushing pink and indigo. And here's where things slow. Not physically, people still bustle, but emotionally. A quiet contentment settles over the camp. Laughter returns. Someone starts slicing turnips. Someone else sings a song you recognize from your first night here. A child gifts you a smooth pebble. for the journey, they say solemnly. You tuck it in your pocket like it's a coin from another world. That night before sleep claims you one of the elders tells a story, an old one about a fox who tricked a camel into stealing the moon. You're not sure what the moral is, but the rhythm of the words is hypnotic, like the wind, like hoofbeats, like the folding and unfolding of home itself. You drift off thinking this is the heartbeat of the steppe. Movement without hurry, change without chaos, belonging without borders. Not all migrations are losses. Some are just how you remember who you are. Morning in the new camp feels familiar. The grass smells the same, the goats bleat with their usual existential drama, and someone is already boiling tea like the fate of the universe depends on it. You sit up slowly, blanket draped around your shoulders, and take a long breath of that crisp, dewy air. The yurt is back up, the hearth is lit, and the world continues turning gently as if not to wake you too soon. But today isn't about chores or journeys. It's not about goats or games or tea-induced enlightenment. Today is about connection. You're invited to join a gathering. No fanfare, no carved invitations, just a subtle, "You should come," said with that particular warmth Mongols reserve for those who've earned a seat at the hearth. Outside, a few yurts have been arranged in a loose circle. Elders sit on folded rugs. Younger folks bring offerings, meat, cheese, fermented. Mare's milk in wooden bowls, and children dart between ankles like mischievous ferrets. The occasion. It's not a festival exactly, more like a moment of seasonal reflection, a chance for everyone to swap stories, sing old songs, and remind themselves who they are in relation to the earth, the sky, and each other. Your mainstream historical fact. While Mongol society is often painted in broad strokes of conquest and cavalry, its strength lay equally in its tight-knit social fabric. Kinship networks, oral tradition, and gatherings like this helped preserve identity, knowledge, and values over centuries of mobility. You're handed a small bundle of juniper twigs, dry and fragrant. One by one, people toss their sprigs into the fire. The smoke is believed to cleanse, to connect past and future, to send prayers upward through the spiraling column. You drop yours in. The smoke curls toward you like it knows your name. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Mongol families would bury tiny tokens, a carved stone, a snippet of horsehair beneath their yurt floor when setting up camp, believing it would link the home to the spirit of the land. Historians still argue whether this was purely symbolic or had roots in deeper shamanic practices. Later, you're drawn into a story circle. The teller is a woman with a voice like gravel warmed by sunlight. She tells of a raven who stole fire from the mountain gods and accidentally invented yak butter. Everyone laughs, not because they believe it, but because they wish they did. You share something too, a simple tale from your own childhood translated piece by a young cousin sitting beside you. It's about a broken bicycle, a hill, and too much courage. You finish, and there's a pause, then laughter, a nod. A second cousin gives you a light thump on the back. You'd have made a good horse thief, someone says, which you're told is high praise. As the day unfolds, more people arrive, neighbors from the last camp over, traveling herders who saw the smoke and stopped by a woman selling carved bone combs who insists they're lucky. There's music again, but looser this time, improvised. Someone makes a rhythm on a wooden bowl, another hums a tune, and before long the whole camp seems to sway. Not dance exactly, just move, like the wind, like time. You eat roasted mutton, drink a little too much arag, and sit back with the heavy-bellied contentment of someone who's earned every nap for the rest of the month. Later still, when the sun has dipped below the ridge and stars start pricking the sky like spilled sugar, the mood softens again. Fires are stoked, lower voices drop. Children curl up beside siblings, someone covers a sleeping dog with a blanket, and the evening fades into something slower than night, but warmer than sleep. You're handed one last cup of tea just as the final coals begin to dim. It tastes of smoke milk and memory. You sip it slowly, eyes half-lidded, the sound of crickets mingling with distant hoofbeats. And just before bed, someone whispers a blessing, not a formal prayer, but more like a wish. Sleep like a cloud, wake like a mountain. You curl beneath your blanket, the yurt, now your second skin, and feel every moment of the journey held in your bones. The horses, the songs, the wind in your face. This life, simple and fierce, has changed you. And now, let's ease into stillness together. The fire is just a faint glow now, the last embers pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the ash. You lie on your side, wrapped in wool and silence, the kind of silence that cradles instead of empties. Outside, the night deepens. The stars form their ancient patterns above the steppe, unchanged for generations. A soft breeze nudges the yurt wall, creaking it gently, like a lullaby hummed by the earth itself. Your breathing slows. Your limbs soften. The day's voices begin to fade, not forgotten, just filed away in that quiet library of memory you carry everywhere. You still hear the distant laughter, the whispered stories, the rustling of felt and straw, but they drift now like feathers settling. The weight of the journey lifts. You're no longer walking the steppe, riding beside carts, stirring tea or tightening ropes. You're still. And in that stillness, you're held by the warmth of the yurt, by the hush of the night, by the simple, unspoken truth that you were here, that you lived this life, if only in dreams. Your body sinks, your mind dims, and as the last thread of firelight slips beneath your eyelids, you let go. There is no urgency now. No place to be, just the gentle hum of existence. You sleep like a cloud. You will wake like a mountain.